we have been in a series from Romans 12. And he says how God gives us different gifts, and we have all these different kinds, and God says, I want you to use them. Well, I don't have the gift that that one has, and that one doesn't have the gift the other person has, but you give what you can give. You supply whatever, if it's an artistry or science or Bible, or whatever there is that you can do, you can be a blessing to others. We're going to look at that, and I've entitled this morning's lesson, The Widow's Mite, because we're in this series now. We've talked about encouraging, we've talked about all the different pieces of the puzzle. We're going to be talking in the following weeks on leadership and showing mercy. But where we jump into the pool at this time, in Romans chapter 12 and verse 6, where he says, by way of introducing it, since we have gifts that differ according to the grace that's given to us. Some, it's architecture and building and music and medicine, and everybody has something else. And God said, I'm the one that gave you that potential. Then in verse 7, he introduces that, and he says, let us each according to the proportion of our faith. Sometimes a person really has capability, and they're just scared to death to do it. You could, but, oh man, I don't know. And yeah, but are you going to step out? Are you going to put your toe in the water? Are you going to wade out up to your ankles and then knees? And in years of swimming, I know, man, I'd get in a pool. I hate cold water. And so I splash over, and I thought, oh man, there's just no sense trying to get used to it 1 inch at a time. Just dive in there and get that all around you and get going. And so here we're going to be talking about that he who gives, let it be with liberality. Whatever you're going to do, if you're teaching or leading or showing mercy or whatever it is, do it enthusiastically. Do it the very best that you can. Now, in the book of Mark, that we'll be referencing repeatedly, Mark, and this particular instance is Mark 14. But we'll be looking at Mark 12 and Luke 21 that both have this record of what I've termed the widow's mite. But anyhow, in Mark chapter 14, verse 7, he just makes a comment. He said, the poor you always have with you. Like in our society, what do you do with the homeless and how people get that way? Well, not necessarily those people, but we've always had that. It was in Jesus' time. It was before Jesus' time. When you and I leave this earth, if the earth stands, there'll be people like that afterward. It's just part of it. Some have great means, some have very limited means. And then a thing that I thought about from the standpoint, there's all kinds of ways to give. You give financially, you give emotionally, you give personally, whatever the kind of gift you have. You give. By you being here this morning, you haven't thought about this, but really you encourage everybody else because you're here. You know, if it was me and Bob Welander, I'd say, it's just us, Bob, what? I said, okay, Bob, you lead singing, I get the preaching, and Linda's the only one here to listen. So because we're all here, that is an encouragement to everybody. And in talking about picking up a collection for the poor back in Jerusalem, Paul writes to Corinth, and it's about Macedonia. Macedonia has historically been a very poor region of the earth. I was looking it up here just in the last day or two, and it said, like, their poverty level still now is 24%. Wow. But this group of Christians, Paul makes reference and uses as an example. He said the Macedonians, through their deep poverty, it's not they were a little short, on Thursday and waiting for a Friday paycheck. Man, these people were impoverished. It was terrible for them, have overflowed to the abundance of their liberality. They begged us for the favor of participating. You know, sometimes when you're trying to do a project, and if it's financially, sometimes the poor, they've got almost nothing and they still want to give. Or physically, they're very weak, but they want to try and they want to help. And you say, look, how about I just hold your hand and I help you? Oh, no, I think I can do this. It's just encouraging when people have limited capacity and unlimited love. When we talk about really the widow's mite, it's just kind of it comes to be a metaphor of somebody that has very little, but has a tremendous amount of love. In this graphic, you're looking at a reproduction. Obviously, Solomon's temple is not in the center of Jerusalem at this particular moment. And so they've done a recreation of what would that be like. And you're looking at it in this position as though we're from the west looking, at this point on the south. Here's the south entry. And that big part of the structure that you first meet is what they call Solomon's porch. It just was massive. And so Solomon's porch or portico at 1,500 feet long, hundreds and hundreds of pillars. And then in this graphic, you have the temple there, and then beyond that is the fortress, the tower or fortress of Antonia. And you could see it for miles. It was under renovation for 46 years by the time Jesus was an adult. In its entirety, about 70 years in reconstruction and re-beautifying it. And they finally got it done about 6 years before the Romans came in and leveled it. And so sometimes there's a lot of work goes into something, but not a whole lot of response. So when we're talking about the widow's mite, and here in this reference, we'll look at Mark chapter 12 and verse 41. And he, Jesus, sat down opposite the treasury. We'll talk about that. And began observing how the multitude were putting money into the treasury, and how many rich people were putting in large sums. Wouldn't it be odd if, as the young men were going along collecting, that me and Jim was just watching over everybody? Okay, I just saw what you put in. I saw what you put. I just noticed you put in, and you. Okay, and we're particularly paying attention to what everybody's putting in. You say, man, that's kind of creepy. Well, you just back off. That's my business. Well, I thought it was interesting when we think about this. Jesus made it his business, right? And he was watching what people were doing. Now, what you're looking at this part of the graphic, this large area in the middle of this temple complex, is called the Court of the Women. If you start out at the bottom of this particular graphic, that would be from the east end, and you go through this section into the Court of the Women. That's where women were generally allowed to go. This is the women's only club over here. But they had other features in this area. Thayer's Greek lexicon, there's a particular word for this area. And Josephus comments on it. So somebody that was a contemporary in Jesus' time. So he said, there's where the Court of the Women was. And what's interesting, in this Court of the Women, there was a particular feature. And you had what they called the treasury. And they said, well, really what you've got is these, and they refer to it as like a trumpet shape. And there were a number of them, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. And some were for the reception of voluntary contributions, and some were required contribution. For instance, it was a 1/2 shekel temple tax placed on every man over 20, and you had to pay that once a year. It's just like, you come around, the tax man says, okay, you're up. And so in that we find out from Thayer's, who is citing just the rabbis, they just left historical note on it, that there were 13 of these trumpet-shaped receptacles in the women's court of the women, and with chests below it. So you drop your money in, and it dropped down into the box. So, you can't reach down inside. I'd like to make change, and I think I'll help myself a little bit. It's down too far. And yet the opening's large enough that, it's not going to roll around the floor. I don't know that they had paper money back in the day. Everything was coins. And the historical notes on it said, I could not find it. The statement of how they collected is not recorded for us biblically. So it's just historically they said, here's what they did. They had these trumpet-shaped metal tops to it, and then the chest on the bottom, and each one was labeled. They were 4 different things. It was just generically put it in there and let the priest figure it out. And so one would be for incense, because you got to get the aromatic spices and blend them and get them together and do that. Some is, somebody's got to cut the wood, and you spend all your time doing that. Somebody's got to be paid for it, and so there was a wood supply for the sacrifices, and so those were not mandatory, and some were for burnt offerings and sin offerings, and sometimes there was a financial component to that, and you go find the right one and you put your money in that. Some was for vows that you've finished up. And so I just thought that's interesting. If you're in the court of the women in Jesus' time, that's what you would have seen. That's where this event will take place, apparently in the court of the women, because that's where the treasury was. What you're now doing is we're outside of the court of the women and the temple complex. It had a picture like around the temple proper was this big plaza, picture like the Seattle Center. So you got the fountain and the Science Center, all the stuff. Well, they had this big plaza, and as you came into the whole plaza area from the east, you would first encounter this beautiful 1,500-foot long portico covered way, and you can see in the hot semi-arid climate it would be cool. If you had sandals, maybe you could hear the click of the leather on the stone. In John 10:23 just says, in the winter Jesus was walking here. If you turn to Acts chapter 3 and in verse 1, you had the healing of the lame man, and people gathered around, and he was running and leaping, and Peter was preaching to the people here in Solomon's portico. If you turn to Acts 5, apostles were doing miracles here. Saints were meeting here. They were familiar with the area. Now, outside the area, remember we talked about the women's court was part of the complex proper. Now, here's the area around it, and there was a wall about 4.5 feet high, beautiful wall, but in several languages told the individuals that are not Jewish, do not pass this boundary line, and you can't pick it up too well here, but they said, if you do, it'll cost you your life, and your blood will be on your own head. It was in Greek. It was in Roman. It's in Hebrew. It doesn't matter what you have been warned. You don't go into the holy area if you're not a holy person. Now, we're going to come back to the court of the women. And so let's just say, we're on a drone, and now you can get up above it and look down in it. And we've come from the east side, we've come through that wall and into the court. And it is, looking here, the treasury is in this area, and those little receptacles are scattered around. Here's where the woman would have come. Here's where she was observed by Jesus in Mark chapter 12 and verse 42. And you notice just beyond the court proper, there's, I think, 15 steps led up to the Nicanor gate, and here's the court of the men. So women have your part, men you could pass through there, but this was the women's domain in particular. Men, you got that next section, and beyond that, you see the temple. And that's the area primarily of the priests. Anyhow, here's the widow's mite. And Jesus is there looking at what's going on. Now, he's not fussing at the rich people for being wealthy, but they're making a generous contribution. And we've all been in the grocery stores, where they have the coin counter. Well, picture that kind of thing. The rich have a lot of coins to put in, and they're giving of their abundance. In Mark 12 and verse 41, Jesus began observing how the multitude were putting money into the treasury. So it wasn't just one or two people, and this little widow came up. Lots of people you coming through, and they're putting money in. Particularly, and many rich people were putting in large sums. So clink, 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 clink. So he's watching this go on. And while he's doing this, here's this widow comes up. Now, I was about to call her little old. Well, she is little, but that's because the picture says she's little. And we know she's old because the artist made her old, but it doesn't say. She could have been a young widow. I don't know how old she was. As far as I know, the Bible doesn't call her old, but she is a widow. And she comes up, and she's putting in just a couple of coins. You go, wow, just the tiniest little, we'll say 2 cents. What does 2 cents buy anymore? Absolutely nothing. Just, I go into someplace, 7-Eleven, I need something, and they give me, 4 cents. There's no sense even carrying pennies. It doesn't buy anything anymore. You may need those pennies to add on something, $4 to buy something, but it just isn't much. Now, I want you to think about this, and this is just as an aside. We've looked at who is doing the giving and where she's doing the giving. We never talk about when she's doing the giving. The thing that is kind of surprising, but I don't know why, is that the time element that this is being observed is right close to the last Passover that Jesus will have on earth. Why? Mark chapter 14 and verse 1. Remember, we've been quoting out of Mark 12? In Mark 14 and verse 1. And 2 days before the Passover. So it's close to that area. It's close to the time of his betrayal. It's close to the time of his arrest and ultimate crucifixion. And he's in the temple watching what people give. And now, again, we're in the court of the women, but we're at ground level. In Luke 21 as well, it says, and while some were talking about the temple, and that it was adorned with beautiful stones and votive gifts, Jesus said, and the days will come in which there'll not be left one stone upon another, which will not be thrown down. He said, it is beautiful, isn't it awesome? And it's not going to last. One of the things should be a takeaway for us, if it's physical, it doesn't last. So we should pay attention to the physical, but it can't be our biggest focus, because if it's physical, it's not going to last. So think about life, think about family, think about others, think about God, because people is what really matters, not just the stuff. And so sometimes people get all hung up on the stuff. Came across a story about this old guy. He just really didn't have a lot. And right next door, the neighbors were moving in, and they were very well-to-do. And he's watching the moving van, and they're unloading, here's all these cabinetry and electronic wizardry and plush furniture and wall hangings, all the rest. And the guy hollers out across the fence. He said, if you ever need anything and don't have it, come talk to me. I'll tell you how you can get along without it. Well, how about that? Because to us, man, we just need it all, and we need the latest stuff. Maybe not. When a number of us had gone down to Texas after Hurricane Harvey to help rebuild, and one of the brothers there who had been through that kind of devastating storm 3 times, and pretty well-to-do, contractor, and trucks and houses, and lost it all. And that's the one, and I mentioned to our group here before that as I talked to him, I said, what was that like? He said, it was just stuff. He said, we had too much stuff. I mean, you lost everything. He said, yeah. I said, what about pictures? He said, it's just stuff. I went, wow. It didn't blow him. He wasn't angry and bitter, and why does it have to happen to me? He said, just stuff. How about that? And so let's think about where our greatest focus is. Is it on God and people and really helping and blessing others along that line? Because from the standpoint of giving, all males above 20, we got some adolescents and young teens, you wouldn't be dinged for tax just yet. But 4 more years, bud, you're in. So that's what they did. You are required to do it. Now, in the book of Exodus, chapter 30, in verses 11 through 16, that tax was implemented at that time. And interestingly, there was no exemption for poverty. Didn't matter how old you are. If you're a male and you're still breathing, that's what you do. But the problem is, anytime there's money involved, there's also potential for corruption to be involved. And so what they did was, said, okay, when you come to pay your tax, we want the tax in the Jewish shekel. You've come for the Passover from all over the Mediterranean world. You've come from Egypt and Cyrene, and you've come from the Euphrates Valley, and you've come from Rome, and you got all the different coinage. For instance, if I come to the 7-Eleven and I got some Liberian Libra or whatever their currency is, I say, hi, I'd like to buy my Pepsi-Cola here with this. They're going to look at me and say, yeah, but no, why? We don't accept that. We operate on a certain kind of, say, well, look, I'll just take it to the ATM and shove my Liberian paper dollar in there. It's not going to work. You've got to have the currency that is accepted for legal transactions in a country. Well, what happened is they would have guys like we have here. You got money, you can take it to certain places, and that's what they specialize in. We will trade you the money. Like you got Canadian currency, you can trade it for US dollar and vice versa. Except they cheated. And so here's the people trying to come, worship God, pay their temple tax, just give the money as, God, I want to bless your work with this. And so they're hitting the people up, cheating them. I'm sorry, the percentage just went up today, and yours is, instead of 8%, it's 15% or whatever. And so what happened was they were crooks, just like all the rest of the crooks, the religious one, selling animals and such as. So John chapter 2 and verse 15 and following, at the first time he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And he says, stop making my Father's house a house of merchandise. And so we think about it as we're here, we deal with money, but we're not all about money. We're all about God. And Jesus said, you guys are a bunch of crooks. Cut it out. Interestingly, Zacchaeus, about this same time, he was a tax collector, but he was down in Jericho. But he had a spiritual mind about him. And he wanted to see Jesus, and he wanted Jesus to come have dinner with him. And he said, if I've cheated anybody, I'll give back fourfold. This guy wanted to do right and be right. Well, you appreciate that. And you get surprised at it sometimes because that's not the general attitude. And Jesus is trying to get them to straighten up. So when we talk about the widow's mite, in Mark chapter 12 and verse 44, Jesus says of her, here is this unnamed godly lady. He said, but she out of her poverty put in all that she owned. Every last dime. Well, didn't have a dime. The last 2 cents. All she had to live on. And wow. Mark 12:43 says, and the truth is that this poor widow, this is the Message version, gave more to the collection than all the others put together. Why? Because ratio-wise, the rich people gave a lot, and that was commended. But they had a lot to give from. And she had next to nothing and gave it anyhow. But then I thought, if you're down to your last 2 cents and are about to die, is 2 cents going to buy you a hot dog? How about a bag of Cheetos to buy you? Nothing. There used to be a thing called penny candy. You could actually get a piece of candy for a penny. And I remember I was young, that had chunky chocolate blobs there. You paid a nickel for them. Man, $2 now. Man, that just irritates me. But if you're going to die, is 2 cents going to turn the tide? And the answer is no. God, you might as well have it because it's not going to help me at all. And look at her attitude. I just want us to look at a handful of things as great takeaways as we think about this as we wrap up. In this situation, that in 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 8, he said, he that will not provide for his own has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. If you won't take care of your kids, you won't take care of grandma, grandpa, or cousin Lou, or whoever it happens to be, he said, look, worldly people will do that. So it isn't like, well, kids, I tell you what, you ain't eating for about 40 days because I'm giving it all to the Lord. No, you need to take care of family. Giving and helping others is important, but you've got a responsibility to take care of family. Interestingly, in Deuteronomy 15, 7 through 9, and reflected in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7, talks about giving freely in Deuteronomy 15. Generously, and you shall not be grave. All right, all out, how much you take no good. Not grumbling and griping. God, I am so glad to give this. I can do better, and I am so thankful for the opportunity. In Proverbs 37:25, one of the questions and things we can take away is, do I trust God? Yeah, but if I give it, maybe I don't get any more. What if we have a bad week next week? What if the plague strikes U.S.? What if there's nuclear war? What if China takes over? I want to tell you what. If we got nuclear war and China takes over, it does not matter how much, as money, we generally don't have a lot of real money. There's marks in a checkbook that a computer says is in a bank that's backed by nothing. And so if the second coming happens or nuclear war, all the digital check marks are zero. The reality is, how much do we love? Because we don't have control over what foreign countries do and that kind of thing, but we do have control of our attitude. Do I trust God? Proverbs 37:25, he said, I have been young, and now am I old, yet I've never seen the righteous forsaken or his seed begging bread. I've been a Christian 60 plus years. I've seen a lot of people, you have too, with their little signs up there at the corner, hungry, need food, want a beer, whatever they're saying, somehow to get money. I've never seen a Christian with a cardboard sign out there that says, man, I got nothing, I need a hamburger. Why? Because Christians want to take care of Christians. Family wants to take care of family. The real question is, do I really trust God to take care of me? Proverbs 37 and in verse 26, that aspect of the generous, that not only we're not forsaken, but our descendants are a blessing. You're teaching your children to love others and be generous to others. In 2 Corinthians 8 and verse 12, they say, yeah, but I don't have the ability what the other preachers. You don't have to have that. Paul tells the Corinthians, it's acceptable as a man has, not what he does not have. You give what you can. Not what, if I was really rich, what I would do. I heard a story a gazillion years ago about some guy in the rural area was telling the preacher after some sermon on giving, he says, preacher, if I was rich, Man, and I was to give animals, I'd give 4 hogs, just to show how much I love God. And the preacher said, well, Henry, I appreciate that. You don't have 4 hogs, but you do have 1 hog. Well, now, preacher, you've gone to meddling. So the reality is, what do we choose to? What do we have the ability to? Do I have greater ability? And I'm not doing what I have the ability to do. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 8 and 10 and 11. He said that if whoever sows will reap. And Paul says you'll be enriched in everything. We get blessings. God wants to take care of us. And what we need to look at ourselves is, and he tells the Corinthians, let not your gift be affected by covetousness. Lord, I was gonna, but I decided I need to go to Disneyland. Just is my attitude. I want to give, and I want to take care of others. I want to take care of family. I want to be an honor to you, and I want to respect you for all that you do. In 2 Corinthians 9:15, thanks be to God for his undescribable gift, what God has given us in Jesus Christ. We got forgiveness of sins. We're going home, Christians. We'll be there together, Christians. We'll be singing and hearing the anthem of the angels sing. We're going home, and God has given us his gift. If you're here this morning saying, I need to be baptized into Christ, and I've waited long enough because I do believe in him. I'm willing to repent of my sins. I'm willing to confess my faith. I want to step out. And like Paul Mitchell was talking about, start practicing Christianity. He said, all right, 1 step at a time. Whatever we can do to help you, we would be honored. If you'd like to tell us by